Judge adjusted her microphone and looked at the woman sitting alone at the respondent's table. Ms. Okafor, I see you have no legal counsel present, is that correct? The courtroom rippled with quiet laughter. Bryce Harrington, seated across the aisle in a suit that cost more than most people's rent, leaned toward the blonde woman beside him and whispered just loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. She probably Googled how to win a divorce on a library computer. Vanessa Klein covered her mouth, stifling a laugh. The bailiff didn't bother telling them to be quiet. Nobody bothered with Celeste Okafor anymore. She was sitting there in a cotton blouse she'd ironed that morning on a towel laid over her kitchen counter because she didn't own an ironing board. Her shoes were from a clearance rack at Payless, and the folder in front of her was held together with a rubber band. She looked like a woman who had already lost. But Celeste's hands weren't shaking. Her breathing was steady, and the phone tucked inside that rubber-banded folder had just received a message that read, "Acquisition finalized, arriving in 12 minutes." In exactly 12 minutes, the doors of courtroom 7B in the Fulton County Superior Court of Georgia would open, and the people laughing at Celeste Okafor would learn that they had just mocked the woman who owned the ground beneath their feet. Celeste had met Bryce Harrington 6 years earlier at a fundraiser for affordable housing in downtown Atlanta. She had been 26, freshly graduated from Georgia Tech with a master's in structural engineering, working 14-hour days at a small black-owned architecture firm called Mosaic Design. She loved the work. She loved the math of buildings, the way steel and glass could be arranged to make something that would outlast everyone who walked through its doors. She was quiet, focused, and brilliant in a way that made her easy to overlook. Bryce noticed her because she was the only person at the gala who wasn't trying to network. She was standing by the window, studying the skyline, mentally calculating the load distribution of a high-rise across the street. He found that fascinating, or at least he said he did. He was charming. He was tall. He had the kind of confidence that comes from never hearing the word no. His family's company, Harrington Properties, had been developing commercial real estate across the South for 2 generations. His father had built strip malls. Bryce built luxury condos. He called himself a visionary. Celeste would later learn he was just a man with his father's money and a gift for talking. They married within a year. Celeste left Mosaic Design because Bryce said it was beneath her. "You're a Harrington now," he told her. "You don't need to work for someone else." What he meant was that he didn't want her to work at all. He wanted her at home, planning dinner parties for his investors, smiling at his business partners, and looking grateful. Celeste designed the interiors of 3 Harrington Properties developments during the marriage. She redesigned the structural plans for the Harrington Midtown Tower when the original engineer's calculations were off by a dangerous margin. She caught a flaw in the foundation that would have cost the company $40 million in liability. She did all of this for free because Bryce said it was a family contribution, not work. She never put her name on anything. When Bryce started coming home late, smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers, Celeste didn't confront him. She started saving, not money. She saved documents, emails, blueprints with her handwriting in the margins. She saved the original CAD files time-stamped with her login credentials. She saved everything because Celeste Okafor had grown up watching her mother lose a house to a man who swore he'd built it alone, and she had promised herself she would never be caught without proof. The affair with Vanessa Klein became public when Bryce brought her to a company Christmas party and introduced her as his interior design consultant. Vanessa was 23, a recent graduate from a 2-year program, and her primary qualification was that she laughed at everything Bryce said. Celeste stood in the corner of that party, holding a glass of sparkling water, watching her husband's hand on another woman's lower back, and she made a decision. She didn't cry. She went home, opened her laptop, and began to plan. The divorce filing came from Bryce's side. He wanted it fast, clean, and brutal. His attorney, Mitchell Graves, was a partner at Graves & Whitmore, the kind of firm that billed $800 an hour and treated opposing parties like insects. Graves had filed a motion claiming that Celeste had contributed nothing of financial value to the marriage and that the prenuptial agreement, which Celeste had signed at 27 without independent legal counsel, entitled her to a flat payment of $15,000 and nothing else. $15,000 for 4 years of marriage, 3 buildings she'd saved from structural failure, and a career she'd abandoned because her husband told her she didn't need one. The first hearing had been a disaster. Celeste had stood in front of Judge Patricia Holt and tried to explain her contributions, but Graves had objected to everything. Hearsay, irrelevant, lacks foundation. The judge, who was sympathetic but bound by procedure, told Celeste she needed a lawyer. Celeste said she couldn't afford one. Bryce, sitting at his table with 2 paralegals and a leather briefcase, had smiled. That was 3 weeks ago. Today was the final hearing. Ms. Okafor, Judge Holt said now, her voice carrying a note of genuine concern. I strongly advised you to seek legal representation. Are you prepared to proceed without it? I am, Your Honor, Celeste said. Her voice was calm. Graves stood up, adjusting his cufflinks. Your Honor, I'd like to move directly to the matter of asset division. My client has been more than generous. Ms. Miver, Okafor is entitled to $15,000 under the prenuptial agreement, which she signed voluntarily. We are also, as a gesture of goodwill, offering her an additional 60 days to vacate the marital residence. 60 days, Celeste repeated quietly. I think that's quite reasonable, Graves said, smiling at the judge the way a man smiles when he's already ordered dessert. Given that Ms. Okafor has no income, no assets, and no professional standing, she should be grateful for the offer. Bryce leaned back in his chair, crossing his ankle over his knee. He was wearing a watch that cost $22,000. Celeste knew because she'd seen the receipt in his desk drawer. He looked at her the way you look at something you're about to throw away. Your Honor, Celeste said, standing up. She held the rubber-banded folder. May I address the court? You may. Mr. Graves has stated that I contributed nothing to this marriage. He says I have no professional standing. She paused. I'd like to present evidence to the contrary. Graves laughed softly. Your Honor, we've been through this. Ms. Okafor designed a few mood boards. That doesn't constitute. I redesigned the structural supports for the Harrington Midtown Tower, Celeste said, her voice rising just enough to fill the room. I identified a critical flaw in the foundation piers that would have caused a partial collapse within 5 years. That correction saved Harrington Properties an estimated $43 million in potential damages and wrongful death litigation. The room went quiet. Bryce uncrossed his legs. I have the original engineering files, Celeste continued, pulling a USB drive from the folder. Time-stamped, logged under my credentials. I also have emails from the project manager thanking me for catching the error, emails that were sent to Bryce's personal account, which he forwarded to his chief engineer and instructed him to claim credit. Objection, Graves said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. This is new evidence. We haven't had time to. I submitted these documents to the court clerk 48 hours ago, Celeste said. In compliance with discovery rules, your office was copied. Graves turned to his paralegal, who was frantically flipping through a stack of papers. The paralegal's face went white. She leaned over and whispered something. Graves's jaw tightened. Your Honor, Celeste continued, I also have documentation showing that the Lenox Park Residences, a 60-unit luxury development completed last year, was built using my proprietary structural design. The design was filed under Harrington Properties' name without my knowledge or consent. That design belongs to the company. Bryce snapped from his seat. Bryce hissed. It belongs to me, Celeste said, turning to face him for the first time. Because I never signed an intellectual property transfer. I was never an employee of Harrington Properties. I was your wife. And wives, as you like to remind me, don't get contracts. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, but Celeste wasn't finished. She was watching the clock on the wall behind the judge's bench. 2 more minutes. Your Honor, there's one more matter, Celeste said. Mr. Harrington is represented to this court that his company is valued at $14 million. I have reason to believe that number is significantly understated. That is our audited valuation, Graves said quickly. Then your auditor should be investigated, Celeste replied. Because 3 weeks ago, Harrington Properties received a $12 million investment from a private equity group called Meridian Capital Partners. That investment was not disclosed in Mr. Harrington's financial declaration. Bryce went pale. How do you know about that? Celeste didn't answer. She was looking at the double doors at the back of the courtroom. They opened. A woman walked in first. She was in her 60s, dressed in a black suit that fit like it had been built around her body. Her silver hair was cropped close. Her posture was military, and she carried a single black leather portfolio. Behind her were 2 younger attorneys, both carrying identical briefcases with a gold insignia stamped on the clasp. Judge Holt leaned forward. Counsel, identify yourselves. The silver-haired woman walked past the gallery, past Bryce and his team, and stopped at Celeste's table. She set her portfolio down and turned to the bench. Your Honor, my name is Lenore Chambers. I am the managing partner of Chambers, Kincaid & Rowe, Washington, D.C. Mitchell Graves made a small sound, like he'd swallowed something sharp. Chambers, Kincaid & Rowe was the firm that had handled 3 Supreme Court cases in the last decade. They didn't do divorces, they did demolitions. I'm here on behalf of Meridian Capital Partners, Lenore continued, her voice like polished granite, and on behalf of its sole principal and founder. She turned to Celeste and inclined her head with unmistakable deference. Ms. Okafor. Every head in the courtroom turned to Celeste. What? Bryce said, standing up. His chair scraped against the floor. That's no. Meridian Capital approached us. They sent a representative. A man named Gerald Fisk, Celeste said. My chief operating officer. He approached you on my instructions. You. Bryce's face was cycling through colors. You invested in my company? I purchased a controlling interest in your company, Celeste corrected. She was standing straighter now. The nervous, underdressed woman was gone. In her place was someone Bryce had never met. 51% of voting shares, acquired through a standard equity purchase that you personally approved because you were desperate for cash to pay for the house in Buckhead you bought for Vanessa. Vanessa, sitting in the gallery, clutched her purse. That house is in my name, she whispered. It's in the company's name, Celeste said without looking at her. I checked. Lenore Chambers opened her portfolio and placed a bound document on the judge's bench. Your Honor, I'd also like to enter into evidence the forensic accounting report our team completed last week. It details approximately $760,000 in funds diverted from Harrington Properties operating accounts to personal accounts controlled by Mr. Harrington. This includes payments for luxury vehicles, jewelry, and a residential lease, none of which were authorized by the board. There is no board, Bryce shouted. There is now, Celeste said. I appointed one yesterday. Judge Holt studied the documents for a long moment. The courtroom was so quiet that Celeste could hear the air conditioning cycling through the vents. Mr. Graves, the judge said finally, it appears your client has materially misrepresented his financial situation to this court. That is a serious matter. Your Honor, we need time to. You've had time, Judge Holt said. I am suspending the current proceedings pending a full forensic audit of Mr. Harrington's finances. I am also freezing Mr. Ent Harrington's personal accounts effective immediately. You can't do that, Bryce yelled. I have a mortgage. I have car payments. Then I suggest you have a conversation with your new majority shareholder, the judge said, nodding toward Celeste. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down like a gunshot. Bryce stood paralyzed as bailiffs moved toward him to process the asset freeze. Vanessa was already on her feet, heading for the exit, her heels clicking fast against the tile. She didn't look back at Bryce. She didn't say goodbye. She just left, the way people leave when they realize the ship they boarded is going down. Vanessa, Bryce called. Vanessa, wait. She was gone. Celeste didn't watch any of it. She turned to Lenore. Is the car here? Downstairs. We also have the transition team standing by at the Harrington Properties office. Security has been briefed. Good. Celeste picked up her rubber-banded folder, the same cheap folder she'd walked in with, and tucked it under her arm. She paused at the courtroom doors and looked back at Bryce. He was arguing with Graves, his face red, his hands shaking. He looked like a man trying to hold water. She walked out. The headquarters of Harrington Properties occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower on Peachtree Street. The lobby was all marble and ego, designed to intimidate anyone who walked in without an appointment. Celeste had been here 100 times during the marriage, always entering through the side door, always treated like a visitor. The receptionist, a woman named Dana, had once asked her to sign in as a guest while Bryce walked straight past security. Today, Celeste walked through the front entrance. She was wearing the same blouse and clearance rack shoes. She hadn't changed. She didn't need to. Dana looked up from her desk and froze. Mrs. Harrington? You can't just, it's okay for, Celeste said, not stopping. And I'm not visiting. Get me the executive team in the main conference room in 10 minutes. Dana reached for the phone, uncertain who to call. Celeste was already in the elevator. The conference room on the 12th floor smelled like coffee and leather. The walls were lined with framed photos of Harrington Properties developments, buildings Celeste had helped design, buildings that bore Bryce's name and not hers. She stood at the window looking out at the Atlanta skyline waiting. The door opened. 3 men walked in. Craig Newsom, the CFO, who had once told Celeste at a company barbecue that she should leave the numbers to the guys. Terrence Moody, the VP of Development, who had taken Celeste's structural redesign for Midtown Tower and presented it to the City Planning Board as his own work, and Kyle Jansen, head of sales, who had propositioned Celeste at Bryce's birthday party 2 years ago and then told Bryce she'd been the one flirting. "Celeste," Craig said, his tone dripping with condescension, "look, we heard about the court thing. I don't know what kind of stunt you pulled, but you need to leave. Bryce will sort this out." "Bryce doesn't work here anymore," Celeste said. Kyle laughed. "You're delusional." Celeste sat down at the head of the table. Bryce's chair. She placed her folder in front of her. "Craig," she said, "I've reviewed the books. You've been overstating revenue by 20% for 3 consecutive quarters to maintain the credit line with SunTrust. That's fraud." Craig's smile disappeared. "Terrence," she continued, "the Lenox Park development has a drainage issue in the underground parking structure that you know about and haven't reported. When it floods, and it will, the liability will be in the millions." Terrence gripped the edge of the table. "And Kyle?" Celeste looked at him. "I have the security camera footage from the birthday party. The one that shows you following me into the hallway and grabbing my arm. I kept it." Kyle sat down slowly. "Here's what's going to happen," Celeste said. "Craig, you're resigning today. I'll accept a quiet departure. The alternative is that I send the financials to the SEC. Terrence, you're going to file the drainage report with the city by end of business tomorrow and begin remediation. You keep your job if you do. Kyle, you're fired. Effective now. Security will walk you out." Nobody spoke. The door opened behind them, and Lenore Chambers stepped in with 2 security officers. "Mr. Jansen," Lenore said. "This way, please." Kyle stood up without a word. His face was the color of chalk. He walked out with the guards. Craig reached for his briefcase with trembling hands. "I'll have my resignation letter by 3 o'clock, Celeste said. Craig left. Terrence remained seated, staring at the table. "The drainage report. I'll handle it." "Yes," Celeste said. "You will." Terrence nodded and walked out, closing the door behind him. Celeste sat alone in the conference room. She looked at the framed photos on the wall, all those buildings with Bryce's name on them. She reached up and took down the nearest one, a photo of the Midtown Tower with a brass plaque that read, "A Bryce Harrington Vision." She set it face down on the table. 20 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and Bryce stormed onto the floor. He was sweating through his suit jacket. His tie was loose. He had taken an Uber from the courthouse after realizing his car was leased through the company. "Where is she?" he shouted at the empty hallway. He found her in the conference room, sitting in his chair, reviewing a stack of contracts. "Get out of my chair, Celeste." "It's my chair," she said without looking up. "The lease on this building is in the company's name. I own the company." "This is insane. You were a housewife. You brought cookies to the holiday party. You don't know the first thing about running a business." Celeste set down her pen. She looked up at him. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't triumphant. It was tired. "I designed the building you're standing in, Bryce." "What?" "Not this specific building you're standing in, Bryce." "What?" "Not this specific building, but the one on Lenox, and the one on Piedmont, and the tower downtown that won the AIA Georgia Award last year. I designed all of them. I solved the engineering problems you couldn't even identify. And every single time, you took my work, handed it to someone else, and told me to go home and make dinner." Bryce's mouth opened and closed. He looked like a fish pulled from water. "You want to know why I didn't fight you sooner?" Celeste stood up. She was shorter than him by nearly a foot, but the distance between them felt inverted. "Because I loved you. I actually loved you. I thought if I helped you enough, you'd see me, you'd respect me, you'd say thank you." She shook her head. "You never said thank you. Not once. In 4 years. Celeste, you told the court I was a freeloader. You told Vanessa I was boring. You told your friends I was dead weight." Her voice didn't crack. It was steady and low, the voice of someone who had already processed the grief and come out the other side. "But I was the foundation, Bryce. I was the thing holding everything up. And you didn't notice until I stepped away and the whole structure started to crack." Bryce took a step back. He bumped into the wall. "What do you want?" he whispered. "I want what's mine," Celeste said. "I want credit for every building I designed. I want my name on the blueprints. I want the Midtown Tower project attributed correctly in every public filing. And I want you to resign as CEO, effective today, with a public statement acknowledging my contributions." "You want me to humiliate myself?" "I want you to tell the truth," Celeste said, "for the first time in your life." "And if I refuse?" Celeste walked to the window and looked out at the city. Then Lenore files the SEC complaint tomorrow morning. The fraud charges will be public by noon. Your father's name, the Harrington name, will be in the journal, not for building things, but for cooking the books. Your choice. Bryce stood in the doorway of the conference room for a long time. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched. Something behind his eyes shifted, the way a building shifts just before it falls. I'll sign the papers, he said quietly. They're on the desk, Celeste replied. Lenore drew them up this morning. He walked to the table, sat down heavily, and picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line. I really did love you, he said without looking up. In the beginning. I know, Celeste said. That's the part that hurts. He signed. 2 months later, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a feature on the front page of the business section. The headline read, The Architect They Never Named, How Celeste Okafor Built an Empire from the Shadows. The article detailed how a young structural engineer had designed 3 of Atlanta's most prominent developments without receiving public credit, how she had built a private equity firm called Meridian Capital during the quiet hours of her marriage, acquiring small, distressed properties across the Southeast and quietly renovating them into affordable housing complexes, and how she had ultimately acquired a controlling stake in the very company that had erased her contributions. The photo showed Celeste standing on the roof of the Midtown Tower, the city behind her, the wind pulling at her jacket. She wasn't smiling. She was looking at the skyline the way she always had, with the eyes of someone who understood what held things together. Gerald Fisk, her COO, had framed the article and hung it in the Meridian Capital lobby. Celeste told him to take it down. We don't celebrate the past, she said. We build what's next. She renamed Harrington Properties. It was now Okafor Development Group. The Harrington name came off every building, every letterhead, every sign. She didn't do it for revenge. She did it because the name didn't mean anything anymore. It had been a mask, and masks don't deserve monuments. Bryce moved to Savannah. He took a job as a property manager at a mid-tier apartment complex, the kind of place he used to drive past without seeing. He spent his days fielding maintenance requests and arguing with tenants about parking spaces. The Porsche was gone. The Buckhead house was gone. Vanessa was gone. Having moved to Miami with a real estate broker she met on a dating app 3 weeks after the court hearing. One evening, Bryce was walking through the leasing office when the television in the lobby caught his eye. A local news channel was covering the groundbreaking of a new development in Midtown, a mixed-use tower designed to include affordable units, a community health clinic, and a rooftop garden. The reporter was interviewing the developer. It was Celeste. She was wearing a hard hat and a blazer, standing in front of a construction site, gesturing at blueprints with the kind of authority that comes from knowing every line on the page. She was laughing at something the reporter had said. A real laugh, open and unguarded, the kind of laugh Bryce hadn't heard in years. This building is personal to me, Celeste said on the screen. I grew up in a neighborhood where the buildings were falling apart and nobody cared enough to fix them. I became an engineer because I wanted to build things that lasted, things that held people up instead of letting them down. Bryce stood in the leasing office, holding a stack of maintenance forms, watching the woman he'd called boring change the skyline of the city he used to think he owned. Can I help you, sir? The front desk clerk asked. Bryce looked away from the screen. No, he said quietly. No, I don't think anyone can. He walked back to his office, closed the door, and sat in the dark for a long time. Back in Atlanta, Celeste walked through the construction site as the sun went down. The steel skeleton of the new building rose around her, raw and unfinished, full of potential. She ran her hand along a support beam, feeling the cold metal under her fingers. Lenore called her cell. The mayor's office confirmed. They want you on the housing commission. Tell them yes, Celeste said. And Celeste, the architecture firm at Georgia Tech, they're naming the new fellowship after you. The Okafor Fellowship for Structural Innovation. Celeste stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the unfinished building, surrounded by concrete and steel and open sky, and she pressed her hand against her chest. Celeste, you there? I'm here, she said. I've always been here. She hung up and looked at the skyline one more time. The city was lit up, gold and amber, every building a story, every structure held up by someone's invisible hands. She thought about the courtroom, the rubber-banded folder, the clearance rack shoes. She thought about the girl who used to stand by the window at Gallus, calculating load distributions in her head while everyone else drank champagne. That girl had built all of this, not with money, not with revenge, with math and patience and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she was the foundation the whole time. Celeste O'Kafer turned away from the skyline and walked toward the future, and she didn't look back.